Tom crossed his arms as David rolled him toward the van. About time, David. David stopped and looked at him. Don't start, Tom, you know why you was in there. Tom frowned. I was 3. David locked the straps on Tom's wheelchair into the van floor. In our family, that ain't a good excuse for what you did. Tom looked around. Where my power chair and my phone? David shut the van door harder than he meant to. Tom, no electronics. Remember, it's our religion. We only had that stuff before to make sure you was okay. Tom rolled his eyes. Yeah. David climbed into the driver's seat and started the van. But some guy named Todd kept harassing Mom, David muttered. I bet that's this guy Will's dad. Tom looked up. Will, the guy that got that talk device. Yeah, David said. Tom scoffed. Him and his people don't mind their own business. The guy named Todd that called Mom. David nodded. Yes. Tom stared out the window for a second before asking quietly, Will is Todd's son. Yeah, David answered. The van got silent after that, except for the sound of rain tapping the windshield. Tom finally spoke again. Will, don't even talk normal. David glanced at him. Tom. What, he don't? He uses a device because he needs it, David snapped. Don't start acting better than people. Tom crossed his arms tighter. Mom said they called people on us. David gripped the steering wheel, because people keep sticking their nose into family business. Tom looked down. So where we going? David sighed. Home first, then church tomorrow. Tom's face dropped. Church again. David gave him a look. After everything that happened, yeah, again. Tom leaned back in his chair. This is because of Will and Todd, ain't it? David didn't answer right away. Outside, the rain got heavier. Finally he said, no, this is because this family keeps falling apart. David kept his eyes on the road. Tomorrow you gonna have the leg bag on you. Tom groaned. Dad will pray over me like always. David gave a small shrug. Being the pastor's son ain't easy. Tom looked out the rain-covered window. Yeah, on top of that having a disability. For a moment David didn't say anything. Then he spoke softer. Our dad been worried about you. Tom laughed under his breath, but it sounded bitter. He nor Mom even see me. David glanced at him. Tom, I didn't mean for you to get mad. I know, Tom said quietly, but all those years. His voice faded off. David slowed at a red light and waited. Tom stared down at his hands. All those years, he continued, every time something was wrong with me, it turned into church stuff, prayers, rules, punishments. Nobody asked what was actually in my head. David stayed silent. Tom swallowed hard. Dad always looked at me like I was something he had to fix. That ain't true, David said quickly. Tom shook his head. Then why do I feel broken every time I'm around him? The words hung heavy inside the van. David finally sighed. You know how Dad is, he thinks he helping. Tom wiped his eyes before David could notice. That's the problem, everybody thinks they helping. Rain hit harder against the windshield. David lowered his voice. Tom, Mom cried every night while you was gone. Tom didn't answer. She really did. Tom leaned his head against the van window. Then why did it always feel easier for them to love the church than love me? David tightened his grip on the steering wheel. I don't know. Tom stared straight ahead. I was 3 when Nate died too, he said quietly. He was my twin, he died and I was locked away. David's face dropped a little. You were in the group home so they didn't have to bury 2 kids, Tom. The second the words came out, David regretted them. Tom slowly turned toward him. So locking me in a group home at 3 was better, David. David opened his mouth, then shut it again. Tom laughed once, bitter and sharp. You hear yourself. It wasn't like that. They lost Nate, Tom snapped, tears filling his eyes, and then they lost me too, just slower. David swallowed hard. They thought they were helping you, he said weakly. Tom shook his head. No, they were scared of me. That ain't true. Yes, it is, Tom shouted. A disabled kid screaming for his brother after watching him die. Nobody wanted to deal with that. The van fell silent again except for the windshield wipers. Tom's breathing shook. You know what I remember most, he whispered. David didn't answer. The door's locking. David closed his eyes for a second. Tom kept going. Not Nate's funeral, not church, not Mom crying. He looked down at his lap. I remember staff holding the door while I screamed for Dad. David's voice cracked, Tom. And he never came. The words hit harder than anything else. David pulled the van over to the side of the road. For a long moment neither of them spoke. Then David quietly said, Dad was broken too. Tom wiped his face angrily, yeah, so was I. Tom's voice got quieter. They made me feel like I killed Nate. David turned toward him fast, don't blame yourself. Tom laughed weakly, tears running down his face now. I already did for 19 years. David didn't know what to say. Tom stared at the rain sliding down the window. Everybody kept saying it wasn't my fault, but then they'd look at me different after. David shook his head, Tom. No, listen, Tom interrupted. Every hospital, every group home, every church person. His breathing shook. They looked at me like the broken twin that survived. David's chest tightened. Tom whispered, sometimes I wished it was me instead. Don't say that, David said immediately. But it's true. David rubbed his face hard. Dad would lose his mind hearing you talk like this. Tom looked over at him. Dad already lost me years ago. The words sat heavy between them. David finally said quietly, you were just a kid. Tom nodded slowly. Yeah, a scared little kid that thought if he stayed awake long enough maybe Nate would come back. David looked down at the steering wheel. Tom wiped his eyes again. You know the worst part. What? I can barely remember his voice anymore. David's eyes watered at that. Tom laughed softly through tears. I remember the machines in the hospital better than my own brother. Tom looked down at himself and pulled at his hoodie. I'm wet, he mumbled tiredly. I'm sleepy, so I'm done talking about this, just take me home. David looked over at him for a second. The anger from earlier was gone. Tom just looked exhausted. Okay, David said softly. He started driving again. Tom curled slightly against the side of his chair, eyes half closed while the rain kept hitting the windows. After a few minutes, David spoke quietly, you need changed when we get home. Tom gave a small nod without opening his eyes. Okay. Another long silence filled the van. Tom suddenly whispered, David. Yes. Don't tell Dad what I said. David kept his eyes on the road. Why? Tom swallowed hard, because if he hears it, he'll turn it into prayer instead of listening. David didn't answer right away. Finally he nodded once, all right. Tom relaxed a little after hearing that. By the time the van turned onto their street, Tom was almost asleep, head resting against the side of his chair while David drove the rest of the way home in silence. David opened the front door and pushed Tom inside. The house looked exactly like it used to, same hallway, same photos on the wall, but Tom didn't react to any of it. He just stared forward blank like he was looking at somewhere far away instead of the room he grew up in. His parents were already standing there. Tom, his mom said softly, like she didn't know whether to step forward or hold back. His dad stood a little behind her, hands clasped, eyes heavy with worry. Tom blinked once, hi Mom, hi Dad. David stayed behind him for a second, then pushed the wheelchair forward a bit more. Tom's hands shifted instinctively, but he couldn't reach the wheels. His arms hovered, then dropped back into his lap. The realization hit quietly. He couldn't control the chair the way he normally would. David noticed and slowed. I got you. Tom swallowed, eyes still forward. The room felt too still. His mom took a small step closer. We've been waiting for you to come home. Tom gave a faint nod, but his face didn't change. Yeah. His dad's voice came softer. Tom, we need to talk about everything. Tom finally looked at him, tired in a way that went deeper than sleep. I already talked too much in the car, he said quietly. I'm done for today. David tightened his grip on the handles, standing behind him. Tom added almost like an afterthought, I just want my room. A long silence followed. Then David spoke gently, I'll take you. And he started guiding Tom down the hallway, while the house stayed quiet behind them. Rod stepped forward slightly, holding out an arm. Rachel, give him space. Rachel didn't look away from Tom, he needs to know. Rod shook his head, yeah, but he just got home. Rachel's voice softened a little, but she still looked tense. Fine. Rod nodded once, good. The house stayed quiet except for the soft sound of movement as they all shifted in place. David kept his hands on Tom's wheelchair handles, waiting for the moment to move again. Tom sat still, staring forward like he was listening but not really taking anything in anymore. After a beat, Rod stepped back toward the stairs. "We'll go upstairs, give him a minute to breathe." Rachel finally nodded, still watching Tom closely. "Okay." They turned and went upstairs together, footsteps fading as they left the hallway. The silence that followed felt heavier. David leaned down a little so only Tom could hear him. "You okay to go up now?" Tom hesitated. Then quietly, "Yeah, just take me to my room." David nodded, "All right." And he slowly started pushing him forward again, deeper into the house. David lit a few candles before pushing Tom fully into the room. The soft light flickered against the walls, making the old childhood bedroom feel different, less sharp, more distant, like a memory trying to form but not fully there. Tom frowned slightly. "I don't know why, but this is weird." David stayed behind him, adjusting the chair carefully. "Nate's shrine." Tom shook his head quickly. "No, everything, all of it." David looked around the room for a second, then back at Tom. "You was in a group home for a long time." Tom's jaw tightened a little. "I know," he said quietly, "but this doesn't feel like mine anymore." David slowed his hands on the chair. "It is yours." Tom's eyes drifted across the room, old posters, faded marks on the wall, a bed that hadn't changed but somehow didn't belong to him anymore. "It looks like it belongs to someone I used to be," Tom said. David didn't answer right away. The candles flickered again, casting moving shadows. Tom leaned back slightly. "Even my own room feels like it doesn't recognize me." David stepped closer, voice softer now. "That happens after what you went through." Tom glanced at him. "You mean after Nate?" David hesitated. "After everything, not just that." Silence settled again, heavier this time. Tom swallowed. "So what am I supposed to do with that?" David looked at him for a long moment. "Start slow," he said finally. "Just stay here first." Tom didn't respond, but he didn't leave either. Tom was settled back on the bed, looking drained and quiet. David moved around the room, getting things ready without making a big deal out of it, like it was just another part of taking care of him, not something to comment on. He set out protective pads on the bed and floor so Tom wouldn't have to worry about accidents or mess. Then he adjusted the bedding so it was comfortable and secure. Next, he installed a bed rail on the side of the mattress so Tom wouldn't roll or slip during the night. Tom watched him in silence. "You don't gotta do all that," he said softly. David didn't look up. "Yeah, I do." When everything was set, David finally straightened up and exhaled. "All right," he said, "I'm gonna grab McDonald's. What you want?" Tom blinked slowly. "I don't know." David nodded like he expected that answer. "Don't worry, I got you." He reached over and placed the TV remote on the bedside table, close enough for Tom to reach. "Here," David said, "you can watch whatever you want." Tom looked at it but didn't pick it up right away. David added a little lower, "But until I get back, don't tell Mom or Dad about the TV. They'll start talking." Tom gave a small nod. "Okay." David paused at the door for a second, checking everything one more time. "You good?" Tom hesitated, then nodded again. "Yeah." "All right," David said softly, "I'll be back soon." And then he left the room, closing the door gently behind him while Tom stayed in the quiet, finally alone in his old bedroom again. When David came back, the room was dim and quiet except for the TV playing low in the background. He set the food down on the bedside table carefully. Tom shifted slightly on the bed and looked at him. "How you know how to do this stuff?" Tom asked. David paused for a second, then shrugged a little like it was nothing. "Your care," he said. "Well, I'm a nurse, I do this every day." Tom stared at him for a moment, taking that in. "You never really said that before," he mumbled. David gave a small, tired half-smile. "Didn't think I had to." He pulled a chair closer and sat down beside the bed, watching Tom check the food without really eating yet. "I'm not doing anything special," David added, "just taking care of you." Tom looked down at his hands. "It feels special." David didn't answer right away. Instead, he just nodded once, then let it. A quiet settled between them again, but it wasn't as heavy as before. Tom finally picked at the food a little while David stayed there, just present, making sure he didn't have to be alone with everything all at once. Tom shifted a little in bed, still tired, eyes half on the TV and half on David. "Tomorrow Mom and Dad want to talk," he said quietly, "but I may not be ready." David leaned back in the chair, rubbing his face. "A pastor talk," he muttered, then he shook his head. "How about why he abandoned his disabled son? Good luck with that conversation." Tom's expression tightened a little. David stopped himself, exhaling. "Sorry, He looked back at Tom, softer now. "That's a heavy talk to force on you right now." Tom nodded slowly. "Yeah, I don't even know what I'm supposed to say." "You don't have to have perfect answers," David said. "You just have to be honest about what you feel." Tom stared at the blanket. "What if what I feel is still messed up?" David didn't hesitate. "Then it's still real." Silence settled again, but it was calmer. Tom swallowed. "I don't want it to turn into another lecture or prayer session." "It might," David admitted, "but I'll be there. You won't be alone in it." Tom glanced at him. "You always say that." "And I mean it," David said. Tom nodded once, small and tired. "Okay, but I still might not be ready tomorrow." "That's fine," David replied. "We'll take it at your pace, not theirs." Tom took another bite, then another, like he'd been waiting a long time just to eat something that felt normal. "This is so good," he said quietly, almost surprised. "I just had healthy food in the home." David watched him from the chair and gave a small nod. "I kinda knew that, but slow down, bro." Tom paused for half a second, then let out a small breathy laugh. "Sorry, but this is so good right now." David's expression softened a bit. "I get it, just don't make yourself sick." Tom nodded but kept eating at a steadier pace, still clearly enjoying it. For a moment, the room wasn't about arguments or the past or heavy conversations. It was just food, a bed, and someone finally relaxed enough to enjoy something simple. David leaned back a little in his chair. "You've been through a lot of hospital-type meals, huh?" Tom glanced up. "Yeah, and group home food isn't like this." David gave a small, understanding hum. "Then yeah, eat, just don't rush it like it's gonna disappear." Tom slowed down a bit but didn't stop. And David just stayed there, making sure the night stayed calm. David pointed toward the table. "Coke with everything flowing," he said casually, like he was reading a label wrong on purpose. Tom looked at him, confused for a second, then caught it. "Soda." David nodded. "Yeah." Tom leaned back slightly. "Give it." David grabbed the drink from the bag and handed it over, making sure it was within reach. "Careful," he said, "don't spill it on the bedding." Tom took it and nodded. "I won't." He opened it and took a slow sip first this time, more careful now, like he didn't want the moment to end too fast. David watched him for a second, then sat back down. "You good now?" he asked. Tom nodded again, still holding the soda. "Yeah, this is actually nice." David gave a small exhale. "Good, that's the point." A quiet settled again, less tense than before, just two brothers sitting in a room that finally felt calm for a minute. David leaned back in the chair, watching Tom settle in with the drink. "I'm glad you're home," he said quietly. Tom didn't answer right away. His eyes drifted to the wall. There was a photo there, Nate and Tom as Bobbies, two small faces close together, captured in a moment that didn't feel real anymore. Tom stared at it for a long time. "It don't feel like it," he said finally. David followed his gaze to the photo. "It will," David said gently. Tom's grip tightened slightly on the soda can. "How?" David paused, choosing his words carefully. "Not overnight," he said, "not after everything, but you're here now, that's the start." Tom let out a slow breath, still looking at the picture. "I don't remember us like that anymore," he admitted. David nodded. "That's okay, memory fades, but it doesn't mean it's gone." Tom's voice was quieter now. "It feels like I'm looking at someone else's life." David stood up and walked a little closer, stopping beside the bed but not pushing anything. "You're not someone else," he said, "you're just finding your way back into it." Tom didn't respond, but his eyes stayed on the photo a moment longer before slowly dropping back down. The room stayed quiet again, but softer this time, less like tension, more like exhaustion finally settling. The dining table was set, but nobody was really focused on the food. Rod sat at the head of it, hands folded tight like he was holding himself together more than anything else. Rachel sat across, tense, watching Tom carefully. David was beside Tom, quiet, ready to step in if needed, but not speaking yet. Rod finally spoke. He cut through the silence like it hurt to do it. "Tom, we sorry, Nate had the same disability as you, we was afraid." Tom froze for a second, then slowly looked up. "You guys assumed that I was going to die next." Rachel shook her head quickly. No, we didn't believe you would die, we thought we messed up, we were scared." Tom's jaw tightened. "To save your God image." The words landed hard in the room. Rachel looked down. "That's not what we—" Tom's voice rose slightly, shaking now. "Then what was it?" Silence. David shifted but stayed quiet. Tom pushed his chair back a little from the table, eyes already watering. "No," he said sharply, voice cracking. "No, God, talk now, be real, be a parent to your son." That hit harder than anything else said so far. Rachel's hands trembled slightly. Rod looked down at the table, breathing slower, like he was trying to find words that didn't exist. Tom wiped his face quickly, angry at the tears. "I was 3, he said quietly. 3 years old, I didn't need explanations, I needed you." David finally spoke softly beside him. "Tom." But Tom didn't look at him. "I needed you," he repeated, quieter this time. "Not fear, not church answers, not being moved away like I was a problem you couldn't handle." The room went still again. For the first time, nobody responded right away. Tom's voice shook, but he didn't stop. "Nate and I were twins," he said, "but one died and the other one was in the group home." Rachel shifted in her seat. "Tom, that's not fair." Tom looked straight at her. "It is," he said. "I got out on weekends with staff for church, but Sunday night I went right back to the group home." David lowered his eyes, staying quiet. Tom's breathing got uneven now, words coming faster. "What if Nate was here?" he asked. "Would we be a big happy family, or would we both be disabled twins locked away?" Rachel opened her mouth, but nothing came out at first. Tom continued anyway, voice breaking more. "A disabled kid acts out because he misses his family, but he has to pretend he's fine so nobody gets uncomfortable. Is that fair?" The room went completely still. Rachel finally spoke, softer now. "Tom, I didn't know it felt like that for you." Tom let out a short, bitter laugh. "That's the problem, nobody did." David finally leaned forward slightly. "You were a kid, you weren't supposed to carry all that alone." Tom shook his head. "But I did." Rachel's hands clasped together tightly. "We made choices out of fear, not because we didn't love you." Tom looked at her for a long moment. "Fear still left me alone," he said quietly. That sentence sat in the room longer than anything else. David didn't interrupt, neither did Rod. And for the first time, it wasn't about arguing, it was just everyone realizing how much had been missed for too long. Tom's voice dropped, rough and tired. "I was a dick to people that helped me," he said, "so people don't get close to me." He swallowed hard, then looked straight at Rod. "Question, Pastor Rod, is abandoning your son a sin?" The room went still. Rachel shifted uncomfortably, but didn't speak. Rod took a slow breath before answering. His voice wasn't loud, just steady. "I think choosing fear over your child isn't what God wants from us," he said carefully. "But I also think you're asking that because you're hurting, not because you want a rule." Tom's jaw tightened. "I want honesty." Rod nodded once. "Then honestly, yes, walking away from your responsibility to your child is wrong, but that doesn't erase what happened, and it doesn't define your worth as a person, Tom." Tom looked down at the table, blinking hard. "So what does it mean," he asked quietly, "that I was left anyway?" David leaned forward slightly. "It means they made mistakes, big ones, but you're still here now." Rachel's voice softened, "and we're trying to face that instead of running from it." Tom let out a shaky breath. "I don't know how to stop being angry," he admitted. Rod nodded slowly. "Then don't rush that, just don't let it be the only thing that decides who you are." Tom didn't respond right away. But for the first time in the conversation, his shoulders dropped just a little, not fixed, not healed, just not carrying everything at full weight for a moment. Rachel's voice wavered. When Nate died, we was so heartbroken just by looking at you. David kept calling you Nate. He was one, he couldn't tell you apart. Tom's face tightened instantly. You're blaming a baby for you abandoning me. David shook his head fast. Tom, she didn't mean that. Tom turned slightly toward him. It sounds like that. The room went tense again. Rachel put her hands together, trying to steady herself. No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying we were broken, we weren't thinking right, we made wrong choices because we couldn't handle it. Tom's voice rose, sharp but cracked at the edges, but I was the one that got left. Silence. Rod lowered his gaze. David looked stuck between both sides, jaw tight. Tom swallowed hard, eyes shining now. I don't care how broken you were, he said quietly. I was 3, I didn't get a choice, I didn't get to be broken, I just got taken away. Rachel flinched at that, like the truth landed too hard. Tom continued, softer now but more painful. You didn't just lose Nate, you lost me too, you just decided I wasn't worth staying for. David immediately stepped in. Tom, stop. But Tom shook his head. No, he said, I need it to be said out loud, because I've been carrying it like it was my fault. His voice broke at the end. Rod finally spoke quietly. It wasn't your fault, Tom. Tom let out a shaky breath, staring down at the table like he was trying not to fall apart completely. For a moment, nobody tried to fix it. They just sat with what had been said. Tom wiped at his face fast and pushed his chair back from the table a little. David, he said quietly, voice shaky, push me outside, I need some air. David stood immediately. Yeah, okay. Nobody tried to stop them this time. Rachel looked like she wanted to say something, but Rod gently touched her arm and shook his head. David moved behind Tom's chair and carefully pushed him toward the front door. The afternoon light spilled through the windows, soft and warm after the heaviness inside the house. When they got outside, the air felt cooler than Tom expected. David rolled him onto the porch first, then down the ramp slowly. Tom closed his eyes for a second as the breeze hit his face. The neighborhood was quiet, just distant cars, birds, and leaves moving in the wind. David stayed behind him silently. After a minute, Tom spoke. I can't tell if I'm angry or sad anymore. David leaned against the porch rail nearby, probably both. Tom let out a weak laugh through his nose. Yeah. They sat there quietly for a while. Kids were riding bikes farther down the street. Somebody nearby was cutting grass. Normal life. Tom watched it all like he didn't fully belong in it. Finally, he asked softly, did they ever talk about me when I was gone? David looked down before answering. Yeah, he admitted, but not enough. Tom nodded slowly like he already knew the answer. David stepped closer. I thought about you a lot, though. Tom glanced back at him. You was little. I still remembered you, David said. Tom looked away again, eyes drifting toward the sky. The afternoon sun sat low enough to feel warm without burning, and for the first time all day, nobody was demanding anything from him. Tom kept staring out at the street. What did they say to you when I left? David was quiet for a moment before answering. They told me Tom is getting better. Tom's face didn't change, but his shoulders tensed slightly. David swallowed hard. That's what they always said when I asked where you was. Tom looked down at his lap, getting better. David nodded once, yeah. A long silence followed before Tom asked quietly, when did they tell you the truth? David leaned against the railing, eyes fixed somewhere far away. When I was 14. Tom looked up at him then. David rubbed the back of his neck. I kept asking why you never stayed home, why staff always brought you to church then took you away again Sunday night. Tom stayed completely still. David continued softly, Dad finally sat me down and told me you lived there full time, that they thought it was the best thing after Nate died. Tom let out a slow breath through his nose. And what did you think, he asked. David looked at him honestly. At 14, I thought if adults made a choice that big it had to be right. Tom nodded faintly. But later, David added quietly, it stopped making sense to me. Tom stared ahead again. David's voice dropped lower. I remember one Sunday you cried so hard when the van came back for you that Mom locked herself in the bathroom after you left. Tom's jaw tightened. But nobody stopped the van, he whispered. David closed his eyes briefly. No, he admitted, nobody stopped it. Tom sat quiet for a long moment before speaking again. They was still grieving for Nate. David nodded slowly, I guess. After you went, Mom cried, Dad prayed, I did my own stuff, it just went back and forth like that for years. Tom looked down at his hands. And now, he asked quietly. David exhaled slowly. Will and Todd kept calling Mom, kept pushing her to face things. Tom turned toward him sharply. So if they didn't, I would go back. David hesitated too long. Finally, he answered honestly. Maybe. Tom looked away immediately, blinking hard. The afternoon suddenly felt colder. So I didn't really come home because they wanted me, he whispered. I came home because somebody else wouldn't let them ignore me anymore. David stepped closer. Tom, that's not. But it is, Tom cut in. If nobody said anything, I'd still be there. David didn't answer. That silence said enough. Tom laughed once under his breath, hurt more than angry now. Wow. David rubbed his face. I'm trying not to lie to you anymore. Tom nodded slowly. Yeah, I know. Cars passed in the distance, while both of them sat with the weight of it. After a while, David finally said, I do think they love you. Tom kept staring ahead. But love without action don't feel like love, he said quietly. David had no answer for that. Tom's voice got smaller. It feels like they loved Nate more than me. David immediately shook his head. Tom. We're twins, Tom said, cutting him off. Every time they look at me, they see Nate. David stayed quiet. Tom stared out toward the street, eyes glassy again. I know they love me, he whispered, but I can't stay if they feel pain every time they see me. David stepped around so he was standing more in front of him now. You don't know that. Tom laughed weakly. Rachel basically said it. She said looking at you reminded them of losing him, David replied carefully. That ain't the same as not wanting you. Tom shook his head slowly. You can love someone and still not be able to handle them. That hit too close to the truth for David to answer quickly. Tom looked down at his lap. I spent my whole life feeling like the replacement twin that failed. You are not a replacement, David said firmly. Tom's breathing shook. Then why does it feel like Nate got mourned while I got managed? The words hung in the air. David crouched down a little so he was eye level with him. Listen to me, he said quietly. Nate dying broke this family, but you being alive didn't ruin it. Tom's eyes watered harder at that. David continued, softer now. You were a scared, disabled kid dealing with something adults couldn't even handle themselves. Tom looked away again. Still feels like I'm the reminder nobody wanted. David sighed and leaned against the porch railing. Maybe at first they saw Nate when they looked at you, he admitted. But you ain't three anymore, Tom. You're your own person now. Tom stayed silent. And if they still can't see that, David added quietly, then that's something they need to fix, not you. Tom shook his head slowly. I agree, but that's not why I gotta go. David frowned. Why? Tom looked down at his hands. I miss my power chair, my phone, my freedom, he swallowed hard. This isn't my life. David leaned back against the railing, listening. Tom kept going quietly. At the home, at least I knew how everything worked. I had my stuff, my routine, I could move when I wanted. He glanced down at the manual wheelchair. Now everybody pushing me everywhere again. David looked at the chair, then back at Tom. You think we trying to control you? Tom gave a tired shrug. Kinda feels like it. David sighed. The phone thing and power chair thing was Dad's call, not mine. I know, Tom said, but it still makes me feel trapped. The breeze moved through the trees while both of them sat with that. Tom rubbed at his eyes again. I spent years learning how to survive without this family, then suddenly I'm back here like nothing changed. But things did change, David said softly. Tom nodded once. Exactly. David was quiet for a moment before speaking again. So what do you want? Tom looked out toward the street. I want to be treated like a person, he said. Not a prayer request, not Nate's twin, not the disabled son everybody feels guilty about. David's expression softened. That's fair. Tom let out a slow breath, and I want choices again. David nodded slowly. Okay. Tom looked at him carefully. Okay. Yeah, David said, you ain't a prisoner here, Tom. Tom studied his face like he was trying to decide if he believed that. David rubbed the back of his neck and muttered, "I want my phone too." Tom looked over at him, surprised for the first time all afternoon. Before either of them could say anything else, the front door opened. Rachel stepped outside holding a cigarette and 4 packed bags. "I agree with you too," she said. David blinked. "What?" Rachel took a breath. "David, I've known about the TV for years." She looked at Tom. "And Tom, everything is Rod doing, not all of it." Tom stared at her quietly. Rachel lifted the bags slightly. "But I'm done pretending this life works." David looked between the bags and her. "Mom." Rachel gave a tired laugh. "Let's go to the 21st century already." Tom almost smiled at that, confused more than anything else. Rachel turned toward David. "Pull the car around." David frowned immediately. "What about Dad?" Rachel took another drag from the cigarette, eyes fixed ahead. "My divorce lawyer will deal with him." The words hit both brothers at once. David just stared. "Wait, you serious?" Rachel nodded slowly. "I spent years following fear, church appearances, and rules while my sons fell apart." Her eyes watered slightly. "I'm not doing it anymore." Tom looked completely stunned. Rachel looked directly at him now. "You coming home shouldn't feel like prison," she said softly, "and I'm sorry it took me this long to admit that." Tom didn't know what to say. For the first time since coming back, the future in front of him looked uncertain in a completely different way. Rachel's voice softened, but it didn't shake. "Tom, you're the only one that stood up to your dad, and that's what made me wake up." David looked at her confused. "What?" Rachel nodded once, like she'd been holding this in for years. "The reason I cried back then wasn't just grief. I wanted to leave your dad for a long time," she exhaled. "He cared more about a good image than what was actually happening in this house." Silence hit the porch. Tom stared at the ground, jaw tight. Rachel looked at him carefully. "And Tom, I need you to understand something." Tom didn't look up. "What?" Rachel hesitated. "Having a disabled child was never a bad image, but your father treated it like it was something to manage, not someone to love properly." Tom's voice came out low and sharp. "So I was a problem." "No," Rachel said quickly. "No, Tom." But Tom shook his head, emotions breaking through now. "It feels like a problem," he said. "A disabled kid in a pastor family, everyone watching, everyone judging, everyone pretending it's fine." David stepped forward slightly. "Tom." Tom cut him off, voice cracking. "Tell me I'm wrong." Nobody spoke right away. Rachel's eyes watered. "You're not wrong about how it felt," she admitted, "but you were never the problem." Tom finally looked up at her. His voice dropped. "Then why did it take me standing up to him for you to wake up?" Rachel didn't have a quick answer. After a long pause, she said quietly, "Because I was scared too." That sat heavy in the air. David looked between them, realizing for the first time this wasn't just about Tom and their dad, it was about years of fear nobody had ever said out loud. David stepped in carefully, trying to steady the moment. "Tom, you threw the Bible in his face," he said quietly. "He did the same thing to everyone, us too, but you're the only one who actually stood up to him like that." Tom looked down, breathing uneven. Rachel didn't interrupt, just listened. David continued, softer now. "Most of us just survived it, or went along with it, you didn't." Tom shook his head slightly. "I wasn't trying to be brave." "I know," David said, "you were just at your limit." Tom let out a shaky breath. "I don't even remember doing it clearly, just anger." Rachel spoke gently. "It wasn't just anger, it was you finally not being ignored." Tom swallowed, eyes glossy. "And what did it change?" David paused. "It changed you coming home," he said honestly. Tom gave a small, broken laugh, "at the cost of everything else falling apart." Rachel stepped a little closer. "Things were already falling apart, Tom, you just made it impossible to pretend anymore." That line hung there. Tom looked away again, overwhelmed. David lowered his voice. "You didn't ruin anything, you just exposed it." For the first time in a while, nobody tried to rush him past what he was feeling. Tom rubbed his face, frustration and exhaustion finally breaking through. "Can we go get my fucking power chair already?" David didn't react to the anger, just nodded like he understood exactly what he meant. "Yeah," he said, "we can." Rachel flicked ash from her cigarette, already thinking ahead. I'll get the papers and what we need from inside, we're not leaving that behind. Tom looked between them, still tense. So we're actually doing this. David gave a small shrug, looks like it. Rachel nodded, we're done pretending things are fine. Tom exhaled slowly, like his body didn't fully believe it yet. Okay, he said quietly, then let's just go. David stepped toward the car, I'll pull it around. Rachel looked at Tom for a second longer, we'll make sure you've got everything you need this time. Tom didn't answer, but he didn't argue either. For the first time that day, the word move didn't feel like being pushed away, it felt like going somewhere he actually had a say in. Ron and Maya were standing near the hallway, talking quietly and laughing about something small, something normal. Then the elevator doors opened. Tom rolled out in his chair. The laughter faded immediately. Tom didn't wait for anything to settle. I need to talk with you, he said, voice steady but serious. Then he added a bit sharper, but I need my power chair. Ron nodded right away, of course. No hesitation. Maya stepped aside so there was space, her expression softening as she looked at Tom. Tom adjusted his grip on the controls as the chair came to life again, the familiar movement grounding him a little. Ron took a step closer but didn't crowd him. You all right? Tom hesitated. Not really, he said honestly, but I need you to listen. Ron nodded again, we are. Maya stayed quiet, just watching, no jokes now, no laughter, just attention. Tom looked between them both. I'm not doing the group home thing anymore, he said, and I'm not doing being moved around like I don't have a say. Ron's face stayed calm, okay. Tom blinked slightly, that's it. Ron shrugged a little, we can talk about what changes need to happen, but I'm not going to fight you on having control over your own care. Maya nodded, that's fair. Tom exhaled slowly, like he was waiting for resistance that didn't come. For a moment he just sat there in his power chair, not being pushed, not being moved, just heard. Tom's voice wavered as he sat there in his power chair. Guys, I'm sorry for the years of abuse, not only you two but the building, everyone. Ron's expression changed immediately, less confusion, more concern. Tom kept going, words spilling out now. I thought if my family don't care about me, why people should, I pushed everyone away. He swallowed hard. This is my mom Rachel and my brother David. Rachel stepped forward slightly, her face soft but shaken. David moved closer too, staying beside Tom without touching him yet. Ron shook his head gently. Tom, thank you for saying that, but we need to be clear about something. Tom looked up tense, what? Ron spoke calmly, you were a kid in pain, that's not abuse. That's someone who didn't have support and didn't know how to handle what happened. Tom's jaw tightened, it still hurt people. Maya nodded, yes, and that matters, but it also doesn't mean you were just a bad person doing bad things. Rachel's eyes were watery now. Tom, I wish we had known sooner how much you were carrying. David finally spoke softly, you didn't learn how to deal with it, you just survived it however you could. Tom looked between all of them, breathing uneven. So what am I supposed to do with that? He asked quietly. Ron answered simply, you start from here, not from guilt, from understanding. A silence followed. Rachel stepped closer and spoke gently, we're not here to punish you for the past, Tom. David nodded, we're here so you don't have to keep living in it. Tom blinked, eyes wet again, but this time he didn't look like he was about to run. Just overwhelmed that nobody was fighting him for trying to be honest. Ron gave a small honest nod. Yeah, you made me mad sometimes, but you also made this job fun. Tom blinked like he wasn't sure he heard it right, for real. Ron's expression stayed steady, yes. For a second Tom just sat there processing it. David let out a short breath and, half joking but still a little sharp, said, you just like Dad. Rachel immediately turned her head, David. David held up his hand slightly, what, too soon? The tension flickered, heavy for a moment, then loosening just a bit as everyone recognized what he meant and how it landed. Ron stepped in calmly, he's not your dad, David. Maya added quietly, and Tom isn't either. Tom gave a small, tired exhale, rubbing his hand over his face. Can we not compare me to him right now? David nodded quickly, yeah, fair. Rachel softened again, we're trying to move forward, not repeat it. Ron looked at Tom. What I meant is simple, you're not just the worst moments people had with you, you're also the good ones. Tom looked down at his lap for a moment. I don't really know how to be the good part, he admitted. Ron shrugged lightly, you already are, you just don't believe it yet. Silence followed, but it wasn't sharp anymore. More like everyone finally talking without trying to win. Tom sat a little straighter in his power chair, still processing everything that had been said. Tell Will I'm okay, he said quietly, and his dad, thank you. Ron nodded slowly, we'll tell him. Tom swallowed, then added, they helped me get back to my family. Rachel's expression softened even more at that. David looked away for a second, like he was trying to hold his emotions in check. Maya gave a small nod, that matters, Tom. Ron stepped a bit closer, voice calm, you don't have to carry it like you owe anyone anything, but it's good you can see who showed up for you. Tom exhaled slowly. I used to think nobody would fight for me, he admitted. Turns out I was just around the wrong people. David shook his head slightly, we should have been the ones fighting sooner. Rachel looked down quiet, we're here now. Tom didn't respond right away. Then softer, yeah, I can see that. For the first time in a long time, the space around him didn't feel like it was closing in, it just felt open, even if everything wasn't fixed yet.